Residents in Queensland and the ACT the latest to get a taste of life returning to normal, but the new freedoms come with a warning.
We cannot afford to become complacent. The pandemic is not over.
A grim prediction on the number of virus deaths in the US, but the president says his country will reopen with or without a vaccine. Australia's push for an independent inquiry into the origins of the virus gains momentum ahead of an international meeting. And Star Trek, not Star Wars, new principles for how humans might live and work on the moon.
This is SBS World News with Darren Mara.
Good evening. Australia is another step down the road out of COVID-19 this weekend, with pubs and cafes opening their doors in Queensland and the ACT. But there are still many roadblocks ahead, with evacuations underway at an aged care home and more cases from clusters in Victoria. 1 million tests have now been conducted across the nation. The number of new cases remains low. Globally, the number of infections has now passed 4.5 million, with more than 307,000 deaths. In other developments around the world, Italy will relax restrictions to allow travel both internally and abroad from June 3. Brazil's health minister has quit after less than a month in his job as the country's outbreak accelerates at a rapid pace, and promising signs in a trial of a COVID-19 vaccine. But first, we begin tonight in Queensland, where residents can now enjoy dine-in meals with a 10-person limit.
After 8 weeks of shutdown, a Saturday morning coffee never tasted so good.
We're getting out and actually enjoying the company, enjoying the coffee, and actually sitting at a cafe, which is wonderful.
The easing of restrictions on hospitality in Queensland welcomed by those small businesses choosing to open. Even a limit of 10 customers is better than none.
It has been amazing. Everyone's chatting. We've got the clatter of plates. We have everyone's happy.
Although the bar remains closed, residents in the region have flocked to the pubs, the beating heart of rural communities.
It was so good. It was really, really successful. We had it booked out, both sessions.
Road trips are also greenlit in the Sunshine State. Residents allowed to travel 150 kilometres from home, with a 500 kilometre limit for those in the outback.
First round of easing 2 weeks ago has not led to increased transmission, and that gives us great confidence going into today.
But that confidence doesn't mean complacency. Paramedics evacuating 35 low-risk patients at an aged care home in Rockhampton after a staff member who worked while displaying symptoms tested positive yesterday.
So it's important that as soon as you get symptoms, as soon as you feel unwell, please come forward.
But since that first case, 193 people linked to the facility have tested negative. Restrictions have also eased in the ACT, which remains COVID-19 free.
Being able to be outside, like in the fresh air again, just the streets have so much more life now. It's not like a ghost town anymore.
But as more restrictions ease, authorities are warning months of hard work and sacrifice could all come undone if people don't remain vigilant.
With restrictions being relaxed a little across each of the states and territories over the past week, we still need to remain vigilant. We cannot afford to become complacent.
The Ruby Princess continues to cast a shadow on case numbers, a linked infection ending Tasmania's 7-day case-free streak. Victoria again recorded the majority of new national cases, 2 linked to the Cedar Meats abattoir, another linked to a McDonald's franchise in Melbourne's north. The state testing 1,200 teachers ahead of a staged return to the classroom.
Victoria now has the highest per capita testing rate in the nation.
1 million tests have now been carried out nationwide. Australians encouraged to keep up that testing rate to ensure we can continue to enjoy our hard-fought gains. Naveen Razik, SBS World News.
Let's cross now live to our Queensland correspondent, Stefan Armbruster, who's in Brisbane's South Bank precinct. Stefan, tell us how our Queensland is responding to the increased freedoms.
Well, Darren, on a Saturday night, Southbank is usually pumping with people, but tonight there's barely anyone around. There are cafes and restaurants open along the strip here, but because of the restrictions, there's barely anyone out. That might be because people have got out further afield today in Queensland. The islands of Stradbroke, Moreton and Fraser Island opened for the first time since the restrictions kicked in for day trippers. So lots of people popping over there, some to see their holiday houses, others to enjoy the surf. And the surf has been epic. Down at the Gold Coast today, there was some beautiful swell. These pictures from Snapper Rocks earlier today. Now, across the state, there are still some heavy restrictions in place, especially for the Aboriginal communities. Palm Island, Yarrabah and Cape York are all pretty much still locked down, and that's caused some disquiet in those places. But police are reporting there's been no major incidents, and they're hoping that continues this weekend, the last weekend before full school resumes on Monday. Darren?
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Enjoy the freedoms. The United States is set to pass more than 100,000 COVID-19 deaths within weeks, according to every disease model followed by its leading public health agency. President Donald Trump has doubled down on his administration's goal of rapidly identifying a vaccine, but says the country will move forward with or without one.
In the Rose Garden, President Trump unveiling an initiative to find, make and distribute a coronavirus vaccine.
It's called Operation Warp Speed. That means big and it means fast.
The timeline aggressive.
When I say quickly, we're looking to get it by the end of the year if we can.
A former drug company executive in charge who'll focus on 14 vaccine candidates said to be promising.
These data made me feel even more confident that we will be able to deliver a few 100 million doses of vaccine by the end of 2020.
The Defence Secretary considers it a sure thing.
We will deliver, by the end of this year, a vaccine at scale to treat the American people and our partners abroad.
Away from the optimism in the Rose Garden, a different picture. Dr. Robert Redfield, Chief of the Centre for Disease Control, revealing that of the 12 forecasting models tracked by the CDC, all forecast an increase in deaths in the coming weeks and a cumulative total exceeding 100,000 by June 1. From coast to coast, there is yearning for normal. Beaches reopening along New Jersey's shore.
This week is the test. We're going to look how many people come, how controllable it was.
But New Jersey also just passing 10,000 deaths. New York easing measures in half of its regions. The governor unimpressed by those who flout restrictions.
Barber in Kingston was operating in defiance of the close order, infected, I think, over a dozen people.
Drinkers in Columbus, Ohio, celebrating the reopening of bars. But retail giant JCPenney, founded in 1902, shutting stores and going into bankruptcy. Amid an economy cratering,
the Heroes Bill is passed.
Democrats passing a $3 trillion relief bill. At the White House, President Trump, in the presence of his coronavirus task force experts, sending a message.
It's very important. Vaccine or no vaccine, we're back.
More than 87,500 American lives lost from the virus. Prulawan, SBS World News.
Briefly to finance, and on Wall Street, US markets went on erratic trip, first diving, then springing, then stumbling and eventually stalling near flat following a softer than expected retail sales report. Australia's calls for an independent inquiry into the origins of coronavirus are gaining momentum, with a senior official from the European Union backing the calls. Amid increasing tensions in the Australia-China relationship, the US ambassador to Australia has accused Beijing of creating the pandemic through gross negligence and brazen dishonesty.
The diplomatic call for a global inquiry into the origins of coronavirus deemed as
completely unremarkable,
but perceived differently by Beijing. Already backed by the US and Britain, Australia's calls for the investigation also securing support from the European Union. EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell saying it would strengthen defences against future pandemics, the news bolstering the government's efforts. Australia supports the EU-led resolution for an independent evaluation, and we are working towards this outcome at next week's World Health Assembly meeting.
The EU carries a lot of international weight in backing an inquiry. I think it's a fundamental and good thing.
Diplomatic ties between Canberra and Beijing are under strain, with 4 abattoirs in Australia now banned from exporting beef and threats of tariffs on Australian barley. Beijing denies its retaliation, but experts believe it's not a coincidence.
China and Australia are not alone in the world, and even though China is big, it's not big enough to own the world.
We are standing our ground on our values, and the things that we know are always important.
An independent, thorough inquiry, looking forward to avoid any mistakes that have been made in the past, would be a very useful exercise.
China this week called on Australia to meet it halfway, saying the relationship requires effort on both sides. Though an intervention from a close ally unlikely to help, Donald Trump's personal pick as US ambassador to Australia, accusing China of not only creating the pandemic, but orchestrating a cover-up through gross negligence, obsessive secrecy and brazen dishonesty.
Which we recognise.
China's ambassador is yet to respond. Pablo Vinales, SBS World News.
With Australian businesses cautiously emerging from enforced hibernation, it's predicted almost 100,000 jobs will be restored in the accommodation and food services sector alone. In another stark reflection of the economy, more households are deferring home loan repayments.
Guillaume Lau has been in Australia since October on a working holiday visa. Like so many others, the 28-year-old lost his casual job at this French cafe when the pandemic hit. But as restrictions slowly ease, he's now earning a living again.
They need more people, they need more staff, so it's good. We're starting to work again.
Guillaume's among almost 100,000 people forecast to regain jobs in the food services and accommodation workforce under the first stage of Australia's 3-step recovery plan. According to the Treasury analysis, the transport, postal and warehousing industry will also be boosted by more than 25,000 workers, followed by almost 20,000 jobs in the professional, scientific and technical services sector, which includes accountants, solicitors, vets and graphic designers, and the construction industry is predicted to welcome back 15,000 workers. Overall, more than 252,000 jobs are expected to be restored by July as economies are reopened.
We need to start that comeback, and it's a start. Those numbers are great, but it's a start. There's still plenty of people out there waiting to come back into the jobs.
While the restoration of the workforce is welcome, we're only slowly emerging from this economic hibernation, and there's evidence many households are struggling to keep the roofs over their heads. It's been revealed repayments on 429,000 home loans have been deferred since the start of the crisis, totalling more than $153 billion.
There are now 1 in 14 Australian mortgages where the banks have deferred their repayment.
But homeowners are being warned of the longer-term consequences.
As soon as the holiday ends, your monthly mortgage repayments are likely to go up, and you're likely to pay thousands of dollars in extra interest over the life of your loan.
If it can be avoided, there are alternatives.
Do you have money in your redraw or offset that you can use right now? Can you ask your bank for a lower interest rate to help reduce your monthly mortgage repayments? Or thirdly, can you switch to part payments, because every dollar counts when it comes to paying down your debt?
Navigating our way out of a health crisis while managing the increasing economic burden. Catalina Flores, SBS World News.
Coming up after the break, concerns as the infection rate in the UK rises. A backlog of hundreds of thousands of patients as elective surgeries resume across Australia. At nearly 30,000 new cases in just 2 days, Brazil's outbreak accelerates at a rapid pace.
Tonight at 7:30, hosted by Miff and Joel, this stay-at-home sing-along will feature artists from all across the world and an in-studio performance from our very own Montaigne in Eurovision 2020 Big Night In. Then we count down Eurovision's top 40 controversies. Who do you think Think You Are is back with a heartwarming new series.
If only you could go back in time.
Join these Aussie icons in a journey of self-discovery as they venture down the roads laid by their ancestors.
So this is where it gets really exciting.
From the bustling streets of Chennai...
This is where your ancestor got married.
...to Renaissance Malta.
Incredible. What a great story.
Who Do You Think You Are starts Tuesday 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
At Coles, we're helping lower the cost of dinner with some of the key ingredients for delicious slow cooker beef with cheesy dumplings. Like Coles no added hormones gravy beef down to $15 a kilo. Save $3. Coles real beef stock 1 litre, just $1.90 every day. And salted butter 250 grams, $2.80 every day. Find this recipe and more at coles.com.au. Coles, helping you lower the cost of dinner. Good things, great value.
Come on, everyone! Donate some of your data to kids who need it most and power their potential.
I cross the road when I want to, okay, because I'm an adult. So I just crossed the road and I walked straight into the Queensland Police and he said, "Oi, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm being an adult." He said, "Do you have any ID?" And I'm like, "No." Because I don't need it anymore. If I ever get asked for ID, I think, if you think I'm under 18, I am not well, just quietly.
I just want to feel safe. I just want to stop feeling anxious.
I just feel so sorry that people get treated like this.
This is not a life for anyone.
Filthy Rich and Homeless starts Tuesday 9th of June on SBS and on demand.
On Insight.
Bang, wide awake again.
How to get a better night's sleep.
Things which work are being ignored.
Amazingly effective.
It was literally life-changing.
Then, on Dateline. Earlier this year, Britain's knife crimes were a national crisis. As COVID-19 lockdown restrictions start to ease, police fear a deadly resurgence. Insight, followed by Dateline. Tuesday from 8:30 on SBS and on demand.
This weekend marks the first since lockdown restrictions were eased in England, allowing citizens to travel, picnic and exercise outdoors. But in some regions of the country, they say they're not ready, with the infection rate still relatively high. Since yesterday, England has reported another 384 deaths from coronavirus.
After weeks cooped up inside, Britons are now enjoying the sunshine.
And a little picnic and feed the ducks, and it's just been nice to just get out.
People are now allowed to spend more time outdoors and travel domestically for a day trip. Some people are even being allowed back to work. But is it all too much too soon? According to some experts, it's a surefire way to trigger a second wave of COVID-19 infections.
What we're seeing already in London, at any rate, with the high densities of travel on the London Underground and on buses, should certainly give us cause for concern, because those are situations in which the transmission of the virus is very likely.
The government says it's all under control and that a phase lifting of the lockdown depends on a falling infection rate, known as the R number. If the R rate is under 1, infection is slowing. Right now, London has the lowest rate at 0.4, but in other parts of the country, the rate is higher. Like the northeast, it's still around 0.8, the highest rate of all regions in England. Abstract numbers that spell real risk.
Everybody can play their part in keeping R below 1 and pushing R down, and you can do that by following the social distancing rules.
But authorities in the north, where 4,000 people are still being infected per day, aren't convinced. Local councils there say the changing of official messaging to stay alert from stay home is causing confusion in the community.
So our social media message from the local authority has stayed exactly the same. It's stay at home.
Despite the government's blanket approach, it seems restrictions still vary depending on where someone lives. In Scotland, for example, no restrictions have yet been lifted.
Is it all right to put your eye drops in, lovey?
Frustration is also growing in England over the apparent neglect of those in aged care homes during the pandemic. New statistics revealing more than a quarter of deaths in nursing homes between March and May were related to coronavirus. The Health Minister was asked why the information was kept private until now.
I didn't know about that, and it's certainly something that I'd like to look into.
The government has vowed it will test every resident and staff member in care homes by early June. Amelia Dunn, SBS World News.
Italy's government has taken further steps to easing some of the world's toughest coronavirus restrictions, approving a decree to allow international travel from June 3. Under the plan, travel across the country will be allowed from the same day. More than 31,000 Italians have died from the virus, prompting Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte to resist calls for a swifter rollback. Italy was the first European country to impose tough nationwide restrictions in March. Russia's government has begun random testing of Moscow residents for coronavirus antibodies to help determine when they can lift the city's lockdown measures. The mass screening program will see up to 70,000 residents undergo separate virus and blood tests. Authorities hope the tests will help better define infection numbers by identifying people who aren't aware they are carriers. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has refused to consider another probe into police actions during pro-democracy protests after a report by the watchdog found their actions were justified. Legal experts and activists are concerned the findings, which blame protesters for escalating violence on the streets, will further inflame tensions in the city.
A burst of emotion after months of inaction. One of their number will spend 4 years behind bars. A sentence that awaits any pro-democracy activist who admits their actions amounted to rioting. It's a double blow for the protest movement as the police watchdog controversially cleared the force of accusations of brutality. A new 999-page report defends officers in the most violent protests seen in Hong Kong for decades, citing violence and vandalism by protesters.
Where, in fact, there's been public criticism, public misunderstanding.
That misunderstanding, he says, is behind 1,700 complaints and 200 assault allegations. In one case, a protester was shot in the eye. Hong Kong's chief executive accepting all 52 report recommendations, admitting police communication was handled poorly, ignoring protesters' rage and calls for another independent inquiry.
I am not naive to think that the publication of the report or my response to the report, even accepting all the recommendations for implementation, will put an end to this social unrest.
Now leading activists say Ms Lam's refusal to hold police to account will see protests return after the pandemic.
Which proved that the police watchdog is far more serving the interests of the authorities.
Already in Denmark, a dissident cartoonist is waging a quiet campaign. Shanghai-born and Australian-based, Badiuko says Beijing is using COVID as a cover.
They're actually using the coronavirus crisis as a way to further their cracking down.
Last month, China's liaison office in Hong Kong declared full authority over the city's affairs. The next day, arresting 15 prominent figures of the pro-democracy movement.
It's important that the corona crisis is not used as a pretext for governments all around the world to erode on human rights.
A warning to world leaders not to use a public health crisis to solve a political one. Camille Bianchi, SBS World News.
And this week, Australian universities have responded to backlash from Hong Kong pro-democracy protesters over job listings from the Hong Kong police force placed on their websites. For more details on that story, go to our website, sbsnews.com.au. The Indonesian government hopes its success in controlling the coronavirus outbreak will allow it to reopen the popular holiday island Bali to tourists in October. Heavily dependent on tourism, the island banned all foreign arrivals on March 31. Lockdown measures have allowed it to keep infection numbers far lower than the rest of Indonesia. Strong wind and driving rain from Typhoon Vonfong has killed at least one person and damaged hundreds of homes and coronavirus isolation facilities in the Philippines. The powerful storm struck the country's east, forcing tens of thousands of people into emergency shelters. And there are fears the evacuations could increase the spread of coronavirus.
Typhoon Vonfong stormed in from the Pacific, first making landfall in the eastern Visayas region. When it struck, the typhoon was as strong as a Category 3 hurricane and brought with it destructive winds that downed power and communication lines. Torrential rain and threatened storm surges forced ports to close, leaving many travelers and fishing boats stranded. In the municipality of Buhi, Camarines Sur, thousands are in government-run shelters.
We need to prepare, help each other, cooperate and listen to the announcements. Follow our officials so our town will be safe.
The typhoon comes as the government plans to slowly ease restrictions in the entire region of Luzon after placing it under quarantine for almost 2 months in an effort to curb the spread of coronavirus in the country. Local government leaders say they will impose social distancing in makeshift shelters. Masks will be distributed and doctors are on standby. Overcrowding in evacuation centers has long been a problem in a country often battered by natural disasters. Many are worried the shelters could become breeding grounds for the virus. The Philippine government admits resources are stretched, with so-called calamity funds for the entire year almost spent on easing the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. The country is often battered by natural disasters such as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and at least 20 typhoons hit the Philippines each year. But the start of this typhoon season is particularly frightening. The storm damage, coupled with the pandemic, threatens to cause more suffering for millions of Filipino families.
India now has more confirmed cases of COVID-19 than China, a total of almost 86,000. At least 24 migrant workers left stranded by the country's strict coronavirus lockdown have died in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh while trying to hitchhike home. They were travelling on a trailer truck which collided with another vehicle. This is the third major incident involving migrant workers. Many of the poor have run out of work as a result of the pandemic restrictions and have no safe way of returning home. There's been some positive early signs in the race to find a vaccine for COVID-19. Monkeys have been able to develop protective antibodies against the disease after being injected with the vaccine. But it's what's happened next that's really giving some early hope to scientists. That story is still to come. Australia faces a backlog of 400,000 operations as hospitals get the go-ahead to restart elective surgery after the COVID-19 shutdown. According to international researchers, globally, the pandemic has caused the cancellation or postponement of more than 28 million procedures.
With overseas hospitals overwhelmed by COVID-19 patients, a return to normality looks a distant hope for medical staff.
They've had a terrible time. Colleagues have been sick, colleagues have died. They're in no way ready to restart their services.
By contrast with Australia having successfully flattened the coronavirus case curve, cancelled surgeries are now back on.
Victoria will ramp up to 50% of elective surgery by the end of May and to fully resume elective surgery by the end of July.
The patients impacted are thrilled. They're really joyous that elective surgeries recommence.
But they could still face a lengthy wait. A new report estimates COVID-19 has caused the cancellation of 28.4 million operations worldwide. In Australia, more than 400,000 procedures haven't gone ahead, including 25,000 cancer surgeries. And the study authors estimate to clear the 10-month backlog, surgery will need to be increased to 110% of pre-pandemic capacity.
Well, it's a huge problem, or potentially a huge problem. We don't know whether we can push the system that hard to do 10% extra every week when we were going pretty well flat out anyway.
Well, what we're hoping is that the backlog which has been created over the last couple of months will be able to be addressed over the weeks ahead, and so there won't be an unnecessary delay.
And as hospitals begin the big task of tackling the elective surgery backlog, Australians are being urged not to neglect their own health, with evidence that during the COVID-19 pandemic, some GPs and specialists are seeing less than half their usual number of patients.
What that tells us is that a lot of folks are actually not going out and looking after themselves. The message here from me as the Health Minister is you still need to look after yourself.
Doctors warning treatment delays can be fatal.
We're risking unnecessary and unforetold numerous amounts of complications,
potentially resulting in more unforeseen casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic. Gareth Boreham, SBS World News.
Coles is preparing to fight a class action over allegations it underpaid staff to the tune of more than $150 million. The supermarket giant launched a review earlier this year after revealing about 1% of its total workforce had been underpaid over the past 6 years. Adero Law, which is an employment law firm, has filed the class action and alleges the level of underpayment is far higher. The firm claims Coles had a culture of failing to accurately record staff work hours and says the suit will cover at least 5,000 salaried managers, both past and present. In a statement to the Australian Stock Exchange, Coles says it believes the class action proceedings are without merit and it will defend itself. As COVID-19 restrictions ease, many of Australia's 2 million small businesses are being forced to adapt amid rapidly changing regulations. Small Business Secrets visited a diverse range of owner-operators to find out how they hope to survive in the longer term.
We're trying to not dig in too much into our savings because when we need it, it's going to have to be there.
This Lebanese restaurant in Sydney's Parramatta fulfills a family dream. But soon after opening, COVID-19 restrictions shut the doors.
To fit out the restaurant, it cost us over $500,000. We were only open from December to March, so we haven't even got nothing back.
By pivoting to takeaway, they've survived recent months. And like many cafes, pubs and clubs, have now reopened for up to 10 patrons.
Anything is better than nothing at the moment, because the minute them doors close for good, then it's very hard to reopen.
An Italian restaurant, now serving takeaway, says the cost of opening for 10 people isn't worth it.
I can't see much light at the end of the tunnel as yet.
While in Melbourne, it's takeaway or nothing for now.
He's still open because he really deeply cares about each of us.
We're trying to save as many jobs as we can.
JobKeeper has helped this salon keep its staff. But like every other business that's applied for a subsidy, for weeks the owner has paid wages out of savings.
Because there's no cash flow coming through, and now with JobKeeper, we can hopefully move forward.
With bookings limited by social distancing rules, income is also lower.
If social distancing stays in place for years, we have to redo our business.
Well, our sales are down 80 to 90%.
Rugby league legend Peter Wynne is waiting for sports to kick off.
That light on the horizon, that rugby league will start, and I know what a boost it'll do for my business.
Despite a battle plan to trade until spring, many are worried.
This has been the most difficult thing I've ever seen.
Most small businesses are struggling, and what they want to know is what do they have to do right now to survive, which is seriously to differentiate themselves from competition. And they're not only going to survive, in the longer term, they'll thrive.
Jennifer Shearer, SBS World News.
And Small Business Secrets episodes return next weekend. And if you'd like more on Australian small businesses, go online at any time. Just click on the Small Business Secrets tab on the SBS News website or at SBS On Demand. There are promising signs tonight that a COVID-19 vaccine could be a step closer to reality. A would-be vaccine appears to have provided protection against the disease in 6 rhesus macaque monkeys. It gives early hope for the vaccine, which is now undergoing human clinical trials at Oxford University.
The study is small, but the results are promising. 6 rhesus monkeys were given a single dose of the vaccine. 14 days later, some of them developed protective antibodies against COVID-19. 28 days later, all of them did. The monkeys were then exposed to high levels of the virus, and the vaccine kept the virus from replicating in the lungs and appeared to prevent damage to them. And injecting the vaccine, which contains a weakened version of the virus, did not cause COVID-19 to form in the monkeys.
What we've seen so far is it works just as we would hope for, and it works nicely.
Success in monkeys is a key hurdle. They share so much of our DNA, but many vaccines that protect monkeys fail on humans.
I finally got the vaccination done today.
Human trials began last month with more than 1,000 volunteers injected so far.
We can be the people who solve this awful, awful pandemic.
The Oxford researchers say they hope to see signs this vaccine's working in humans in just a few weeks. But even if everything is successful, it will still be months before they can roll out a vaccine.
United Nations aid workers are rushing to prevent a mass coronavirus outbreak at the world's largest refugee settlement. Thousands of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh have been placed in quarantine after the first COVID-19 cases were confirmed at Cox's Bazar.
While much of the world's population remains distanced from one another, in southeast Bangladesh, nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees live in densely crowded camps. At Cox's Bazar, authorities are ramping up warnings for people to keep apart, following the first 3 confirmed cases of coronavirus among refugees. But Rohingya families say abiding by social distancing rules is impossible.
We have to sleep being in contact with one another's body. How can we maintain distance in this state? All of the 8 or 5 people living in a room share one single bed. We don't have the space to keep distance. Again, we heard of detecting COVID-19 patient at Lambashia camp. We're afraid in this regard.
One camp is now in lockdown with about 5,000 people ordered into quarantine as health officials rush to trace contacts of the infected patients. And there's fears for the surrounding Bangladeshi population with signs of the virus spreading.
You can see more than 100 Bangladeshi host community people are already infected in Cox's Bazar from COVID-19.
These populations are considered to be among the most at risk globally in this pandemic.
Emergency teams of aid workers and refugee volunteers are working around the clock to establish isolation and treatment centres. Hand washing stations have been set up across the camps. The short-term goal is to ramp up testing from less than a dozen people a day to at least 100.
We have updated triage areas in the 35 primary care facilities we support, along with 3 isolation and treatment centres, and a 93-unit contact tracing quarantine centre large enough to accommodate 465 people is nearing completion.
But with medical supplies still severely limited, including medical oxygen, the United Nations is concerned a large outbreak among the vulnerable Rohingya community would be disastrous. It's calling for international support to help those once forced to flee from persecution in Myanmar and now unable to escape a looming public health threat. Cassandra Bain, SBS World News.
Brazil's president has lost his second health minister in a month over differing perspectives on how to handle the coronavirus. The resignation of Nelson Teach comes as the country reports yet another record day with 15,000 new infections. His predecessor had publicly criticised Jair Bolsonaro's decision to reopen gyms and beauty parlours. Brazil is the centre of Latin America's coronavirus outbreak with more than 200,000 confirmed cases.
The Amazon in mourning. Members of the indigenous Kokama tribe pay respect to their chief. Another casualty of COVID-19 as cases of the virus mount in Brazil's remote region. With limited access to public health care, Nurse Dos Santos is one of the only frontline volunteers caring for her community during the pandemic.
We have not yet been provided with assistance during the pandemic. The chief's death is also representative of what's lacking, what's missing for the Indigenous who live in the city.
Brazil's official rate of infection is accelerating dramatically, with more than 70,000 new cases this week. And as gravediggers attempt to keep up with a spiralling death toll, the country's second health minister in less than a month has resigned, amid pressure from President Jair Bolsonaro to legalise unproven anti-malarial drugs to treat virus patients.
I gave the best of me during the period I spent here. It's not an easy thing to lead a ministry like this one in such a difficult time.
Leaving an already overwhelmed healthcare system in limbo. Experts fear the president's calls to lift lockdown restrictions could be catastrophic.
Bolsonaro will not change his attitude. He cannot do it. Brazil could become, in a few weeks' time, the second largest COVID country in the world.
Communities need to hear a consistent message from leadership at all levels. That message needs to be clear.
In Chile, planes airlift COVID-19 patients to cities with ventilators. A surge in cases in Santiago, dashing the government's hopes of avoiding a total lockdown.
From tonight, 6.4 million fellow citizens of the metropolitan region and 7.7 million Chileans in the country will be in quarantine.
On the streets of Mexico, infections are also rising faster than ever. Overnight, the health ministry announced a record rise in cases since the start of the pandemic. But the lockdown is being eased.
We are at the point where we are beginning to have fewer cases, but we have to be careful and not take it easy.
Drive-through funerals part of Mexico's new normal as Latin America comes to terms with the scale of the outbreak. Jennifer Scherer, SBS World News.
Pacific nations are suffering crippling economic conditions under the COVID-19 pandemic. While infections are generally low, many nations rely on tourism, which has all but dried up across the region.
They're some of our closest neighbours, and so far they've been lucky to have dodged the worst of the coronavirus pandemic in terms of infections. But despite few cases in the Pacific region, the economic impact has been huge as borders closed and tourism stopped.
Our income dried up straight away, and we had to unfortunately lay off 50% of our staff, which is really hard to do because they're pretty much family. Some of them have been with us since day one.
At the latest count, there are just over 260 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Pacific Island countries, with 7 deaths from the disease. Australia is among the countries delivering help and has repurposed a significant amount of aid set aside for natural disasters so that it could address the impact of COVID-19. Talks are underway between Australia and New Zealand to create a trans-Tasman bubble and establish a COVID-19 safe travel zone, but it's unlikely that Pacific Island nations will be included.
I would really love the people in authority, which is our government, to join that conversation and to ask that Vanuatu be considered as part of that.
At home in Australia, Dr. Tess Newton-Kane is a specialist in Pacific affairs and has lived in Vanuatu for more than 20 years. It was partly her idea to expand the Trans-Tasman bubble to the Pacific region to help with the economic impact, but she says reactions have been mixed.
We've heard a minister in Papua New Guinea say, yes, we definitely want to be part of that, and it should be, there should be a corridor between Moresby and Brisbane, and, very, very strongly supportive of his country being involved. Elsewhere, people have been a bit more cautious. So the health minister of Tonga has said that if Tonga were to open its borders, they would be looking at having a bubble with countries where there are no infections.
For now, the people of these small island nations seem to be looking after one another, using a bartering system, exchanging food and gifts.
I think it's really interesting. It started in Fiji, and apparently there are 100,000 people involved in it in Fiji. It's now replicated itself in Vanuatu, in Samoa, and I think possibly in Papua New Guinea.
Like much of the world, the future is uncertain and economies hang in the balance. In the meantime, many in these island nations will lean on the good graces and generosity of each other. Douglas Smith, SBS World News.
Coming up next, lunar laws, a framework for countries to abide by when exploring the moon. And German football wins Europe's race to return first.
SBS proudly presents a Eurovision first. 2 massive events over one huge weekend. Saturday, join Miff and Joel as we count down Australia's favourite 2020 act, decided by you, with a special performance from Montaigne. Then Sunday, we pay tribute to all our 2020 artists with an exclusive from Europe. Come together for a massive weekend, kicking off with Eurovision Big Night In. Tonight, 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
Now listen to what I'm telling you. If you want to make money, there's ways to do it. Laws are for cowards.
000, Thursday 9:30 on SBS and on demand.
Right now, at ANZ, we know that many Australians need a little more support to stay on top of their money, which is why we're working hard to support the financial well-being of our customers. So, if you're looking to ease the pressures of your home loan, you need support through the ups and downs of business, or if you need a hand sorting your banking from home, we're here for you and ready to help. For more information on how to get back on top of things, visit anz.com.
At HCF, Australia's largest not-for-profit health fund, we know the importance of care when it counts. That's why eligible members can access our holistic mental wellbeing program with the flexibility to choose what works for you. HCF, that's uncommon care.
You don't give in, you don't give up. It's called Aussie Spirit, and it takes spirit to get through times like these. It's what inspires us to help. Together we'll get through this. Search Toyota, here to help.
Unlike most modems, Telstra's smart modem is cleverly backed up by Australia's best 4G network. So if the connection to your house stops, your home Wi-Fi won't, giving you Australia's most reliable home Wi-Fi. To experience better Wi-Fi, visit telstra.com today.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, I'm in Ballarat.
Wagga.
Curry. Perth. Everything was fine, and then
I lost my job.
my father died. Everybody take care.
What's given me hope is my nonno survived the Spanish flu.
Nobody in this community is going to go without because everyone's looking out for each other.
One thing that's been really weird is every time I sing along to music, and I'm listening to a lot more at home alone, I start crying inexplicably for some songs. Just super heightened emotionally.
NASA hopes an international pact defining principles for humans living and working on the moon will create a prosperous galactic environment that's more like Star Trek than Star Wars. They've released the Artemis Accords, establishing protocols to protect lunar territory should countries seek to build moon bases in the future. The Accords would also permit private companies to own mining resources from the lunar surface. NASA plans to return humans to the moon in 2024. The German photographer credited with developing the iconic visual style of the Beatles has died, aged 81. Astrid Kirchherr took the first photo of the Fab Four in Hamburg in 1960. She went on to date original bassist Stuart Sutcliffe, who died 2 years later. Kirchherr gave Sutcliffe the famous mop-top haircut, which was adopted by the rest of the band. Her association continued through the 60s, producing albums and behind-the-scenes shots from their 1964 film, A Hard Day's Night. Sport, and the German Bundesliga resumes tomorrow with matches behind closed doors. It's the first major European football league back on the pitch during the coronavirus pandemic. There'll be regular testing of players, and all clubs have just ended a week in quarantine.
They'd love to pack the stands to welcome football home. Instead, these fans will be watching at a distance. The thrill is gone, Oliver tells us. Football without spectators isn't football for me. Dortmund's team in training and in quarantine before their match. Players and staff at other clubs have tested positive in recent weeks. There's still no guarantee the season won't be called off again. Dortmund's amateur pitches are still out of bounds, but at this children's club we met one of the few people allowed into the Bundesliga match to work this weekend.
It's great that it's restarting. People need entertainment, and professional athletes are like modern gladiators. They can help distract people from corona or money worries.
This country is taking tentative steps towards a new normality. But surveys suggest a majority of Germans think it's too soon for football. And there's still no live ballet, opera, theatre.
For a dancer, I think this should also be the same measures as football. And it doesn't matter whether it's football or ballet, it should be treated the same way.
Germany's top flight players spreading the public health message. Many fear their fans won't listen this weekend.
There's a big risk of trouble. We don't think all fans will stay at home. There could be violence. It's a health risk for my colleagues.
No victory cheers, no groans of defeat in these, the so-called ghost games. Germany appears to have brought its corona outbreak under control for now. It's hugely symbolic that this footballing nation should now send its players back to the pitch. It's also, as far as many here are concerned, a bit of a gamble.
Australia and New Zealand have been notified the hosting rights for the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2023 will be announced on the 25th of June. The joint bid is up against Brazil, Colombia and Japan. FFA President Chris Niku said world-class infrastructure in both Australia and New Zealand makes the joint bid a compelling one. If successful, 32 teams will contest the tournament in the Southern Hemisphere for the first time. The 4 AFL teams relocating to Queensland to start the new season will be housed in luxurious surroundings to make the move as comfortable as possible. The Royal Pines and Palm Meadows resorts will accommodate West Coast, Fremantle, Adelaide and Port Adelaide to help restart the season. 6 teams in all will be housed, including the 2 Queensland sides. The AFL says the clubs will have sections of the hotels to themselves to avoid overlap. The National Rugby League has confirmed it will retain all 22 referees on its books this season, but the plan to revert to 1 ref per game remains. The league is in mediation talks with the referees' union after confirming its abandonment of the 2 referee model this week. Talks will resume on Tuesday, but ARL Commissioner Wayne Pearce says the referees not in the middle will be deployed as touch judges instead. Part-time officials used to fulfil that role. A potential third meeting between legendary boxing heavyweights Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield moved closer today. Despite being 4 years older than Tyson at 57, Holyfield has confirmed talks between the two camps are taking place. Holyfield posted a training video on Instagram with the message, "I'm back." Tyson also uploaded a video of himself working out last week. Coming up next, the weather and night at the museum. Police hunt an intruder who took some very interesting photos.
Count down Australia's choice for 2020. Then pay tribute to all our 2020 artists with an exclusive from Europe. Come together for a massive weekend, kicking off with Eurovision Big Night In. Next on SBS.
So I hear you mob like slow TV.
It's a feeling.
I'll take you to places where time stands still.
I can never live anywhere else.
At Harvey Norman, get 60 months interest-free and receive a bonus gift card up to the value of $500. The more you spend on 60 months interest-free, the greater the value of the bonus gift card. Shop for laptops, phones, TVs, fridges, washers, ovens, lounges, dining, beds, mattresses and so much more. Shop in our spacious stores or online. We're practicing social distancing to keep our community safe. Get 60 months interest-free and receive a bonus gift card valued at up to $500 now at Harvey Norman. Hurry, offer ends Tuesday.
No! I think at my stage of life, I've just become a grandmother. All of a sudden you realise, oh, gee, it really doesn't matter if I won that match, but gee, it really matters if I had this bowel test. The screening test starts when you're 50. It goes through when you're 74. It's not painful, it's not invasive, it's not any of those things. You just have to prioritise it. You put it at the top of the list. Don't wait until you're 2 sets to love down. You want to be here to enjoy all that life has to offer. Go ahead, do the test.
Unlike most modems, Telstra's smart modem is cleverly backed up by Australia's best 4G network. So if the connection to your house stops, your home Wi-Fi won't, giving you Australia's most reliable home Wi-Fi. To experience better Wi-Fi, visit telstra.com today.
When things change unexpectedly, we adapt. When things get complicated, we adapt. When we need to do things differently, we adapt. At Newcastle Permanent, we're adapting too, by increasing our Hunter-based call centre team to assist you and help give you some financial peace of mind. Because if one thing's certain in these uncertain times, we're here for you, and we're here for good.
Who Do You Think You Are is back with a heartwarming new series. Join these Aussie icons in a journey of self-discovery.
Incredible.
Who Do You Think You Are starts Tuesday 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
Game of Thrones star Nikolai Coster-Waldau must survive life on the inside in Shop Caller. Bring cinema home with Weekend Movies. Tonight 8:30 on SBS World Movies and on demand.
To the weather in the major centres, sunny skies for Adelaide and Melbourne, partly cloudy in Brisbane, Sydney, Darwin and Hobart, some morning fog for Canberra and possible morning smoke from prescribed burns in Perth. Looking further afield, a few showers for Wellington, partly cloudy in Auckland and Noumea, rain also expected for Samoa and Tahiti. In Southeast Asia, thunder for Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur, drizzle in Denpasar and Jakarta, showers in Phnom Penh. Further north, cloudy in Beijing, Seoul and Tokyo, showers for Hanoi and Manila, drizzly conditions in Taipei. Heading west, clear skies in Baghdad and Jerusalem, partly cloudy in Islamabad and Mumbai, drizzle for Delhi. To Europe, cloudy in Rome and Athens, showers for Moscow, Stockholm and Warsaw, fine in Madrid and Paris. In Africa, some showers around in Casablanca and Nairobi, partly cloudy in Cairo and Johannesburg. Fine in Asunción, Lima and Santiago, partly cloudy in Buenos Aires, showers for Caracas. And for North America, showers in New York and Havana, partly cloudy in Mexico City. New South Wales Police are appealing for public assistance in their hunt for a mystery man who treated himself to an unauthorised late-night tour of the Australian Museum in Sydney. Security video shows the man, believed to be in his 20s, walking the empty corridors in the early hours of last Sunday morning. Climbing scaffolding to gain entry, he posed for selfies with a dinosaur skull before stealing a framed picture and the cowboy hat. The allegedly escapade lasting about 40 minutes. Well, the Australian country music singer Keith Urban has headlined a drive-in concert for local healthcare workers in the US state of Tennessee to thank them for their efforts during the pandemic.
Some dresses ran out on the hood of the car. We had nothing, but we had it all, and I think about those.
More than 200 workers attended the free concert, allowing them a rare taste of live music or keeping safe from the threat of COVID-19 in their cars. Well, tonight, Australian fans of the world's most famous singing contest, Eurovision, will be tuning in not for the contest in the Netherlands, but the next best thing. SBS will broadcast Eurovision 2020 Big Night In just a few minutes' time, right after the news. It's an Australian alternative to the glitzy competition after it was cancelled for the first time in 64 years because of the pandemic. The show will celebrate the artists who were supposed to be performing tonight, with an exclusive studio performance from Australia's 2020 entry, Montaigne, who will represent the nation next year.
I feel grateful that I get to try again. I feel trepidatious that I get to try again, especially with the new parameters or lack of parameters, you know, like I am just confirmed for it now. So like I feel the temptation to dither further to the left creatively.
Eurovision 2020 Big Night In will be hosted by Miff Warhurst and Joel Creasy tonight. Fans have voted for their favourite 3 acts from the competing nations, which will be counted down in the 3-hour TV event. And that is the world this Saturday. If you missed some of tonight's bulletin, you can catch up on the SBS News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on our app. I'll be back with news updates throughout the evening. From the team, I'm Darren Mara. Good night.